Welcome to a very special edition of We Should Write from the Texas Trucking Association's annual conference. Now, normally we come to these conventions and we talk a lot about policy and regulation and the issues at hand, and not that we won't talk about that, but we're gonna do something a little different with this series. I really wanna get to know the people and the heart behind Texas trucking, behind the families, the corporations, the leaders, the policymakers, and what makes it tick. And when I say we should write for this show, it means we should write, we should tell, we should share our stories, how we got here, why we continue to show up, and where we're going. So that's what we're talking about in this very special series. And joining me now is a longtime friend, a very important mover and shaker, both in Texas and in trucking and policymaking. And most importantly, I want to say about John Esparza is that I have personally gotten to witness him. He's not only kind to me, to family, to friends, to Texas, to truckers, but all he encounters. And so I know this is one of the best hearts in Texas trucking. So please make welcome John Esparza, the president and CEO of the Texas Trucking Association.
Well, thank you. I wish my wife was here and she could have heard that. That would have gotten me some points.
I'll send it to her. Just tag you in it.
There you go.
Well, thanks for making the time, because this is a very, very busy week for you, obviously, you've been leading up to all week long. So let's just start real quickly, because off air, you and I were talking about how exciting this particular convention is. There are a lot of conventions and meetings across the year, but this in particular is important. Why does this week mean so much to you in your role?
Well, it's a big week for our team. We've got a great one. I'm really blessed to have a really fantastic staff, and everybody does their part, and things can go as well as you planned, but often there are things that pop up that you have to address, and hopefully no one's the wiser. But that's all part of the anticipation of this week. But this week happens to be the largest gathering of state trucking execs in the state of Texas annually. So it's a big production for us, but it is also the biggest meeting that we host every year. We're lucky to be here in San Antonio. We'll be back in San Antonio next year. We've moved around a little bit. We've had it in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in the past. We'll be back up in Austin in a few years for it. But we really love coming to San Antonio. Our folks really love coming to San Antonio, and it shows up in the registration numbers. We've got a really big group coming this year. We're really excited about it.
So I want to talk about your story and how you got here. But first, before that, because you mentioned there's other state execs here. What is that kind of pressure like to? Is there a pressure to show up and show off, or is this a meeting of the minds?
It's really a meeting of the minds. So
Okay.
I'm glad you asked that, because when we look at programming, we do have a committee that is involved of the association members. We always want to make sure we're on the pulse of what they would like to anticipate as far as from our educational programming. And we've been talking so much about some of the things that are happening in our space across the country under the Trump administration and how that affects us. Major Villarreal was just here a minute ago, and we were talking about, on our way over here, about next week and the next week and the next week, about what's going on. We're approaching a legislative session, more opportunities for change, but so much interest in trucking currently. And frankly, for a lot of the wrong reasons. And that's something that we've been working to address for a long time, collectively, with the law enforcement community. And we have a real opportunity to make some hay. And we've done so legislatively in Texas. As a matter of fact, when we did that initially, we were told by the previous administration that what we did was unconstitutional, that it impacted the rights of immigration. And now we're in a totally different administration who is focused on the things that are happening within the immigration space that are detrimental to all of us on our highways, because if they find themselves behind the wheel, ultimately, that is the broad brush that the general public will paint on all of us in the trucking industry. And so that's why it's so important that we address it. And we work collectively as a group of states in the past year to develop a plan. It's called the Trucking Resurgence. And we've created a website for it. We presented it to the administration. They have been going along and addressing the various items that we highlighted. Initially, upon the presentation of that, we actually put a plan together that focused on things you can do that did not require legislation, did not require congressional action necessarily. So, but we're going to continue to highlight pieces of that, make progress, and I can think of no better way to present what progress has been made by bringing our administrator on a panel, by bringing some of the partners that were part of that attack team, if you will. We call ourselves a Cobra group that was just a hand-picked number of state executives to really help focus on what the trucking resurgence would look like, present it to the rest of the states, and we've had full buy-in by the entire country through the state associations and other associations as well.
It's interesting. Well, two things. It's interesting that you said, the things that we can do in our power, because I think sometimes we as society feel handcuffed. It's like I have all these thoughts and ideas and ways I want to make change in my own role or my own job, but when it comes to, how much can I actually get done?
Yeah.
So what are some of those things that are being discussed, in your opinion, in your role, that you through TXTA, I guess, can and your members can start doing on their own, I guess?
Well, certainly. I think it can be something as simple as, you had a major initiative to go through and look at some of the third-party providers of the CDL testing, the schools out there. Many years ago, there was a run of CDL mills out there, and I think it was the 80s, as a matter of fact. But we have, we ebb and flow. There's been so many of those schools that have entered into that space that aren't appropriately training. They're rubber stamping. They're otherwise taking advantage of individuals that might come and pay them for training and get them behind the wheel just as quickly as possible while they're not trained. And with our law enforcement community, we began to recognize that. And in fact, they were the first ones to tell us when we saw issues in areas of the state. Can you imagine at roadside, we're starting to notice a lot of license being issued from a particular state, and those individuals seem very unprepared to drive. They're not appropriately handling the equipment. And when law enforcement starts to notice that, and we start having a conversation, that broadens very quickly, and that's part of one of the things that was addressed on there. And a whole bunch of CDL schools were shut down as a result. And I happen to know the administration's looking at the potential to downgrade CDLs that were issued through those schools as well. Now, you could have schools that have been around a long time, and now you've got folks behind the wheel that actually are qualified drivers due to the training. But how they acquired that CDL is something that is going to continue to be a focus for this administration, for us in the state of Texas, and for a number of our state partners like the ones that are going to be joining us this week.
Great. All right, well, let's go back, because you are sixth-generation Texan, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Texas Tech?
That's right.
Yeah, okay. And you come from a background too, you've worked a lot on the politics side, you've been in advisement to several different, for Perry and several different administrations. But that being said, Texas is in your blood.
Yeah.
Trucking is now in your blood, but how did trucking end up on your radar?
I was born into it. I grew up, in the passenger seat of my grandfather's truck for summers that I spent with my grandparents, and I really, as a kid, I'm really fortunate that my parents allowed me to do that. But I was probably a great blessing to them, for them to be able to spend time with my grandparents as well, give them a break. But I love my grandparents. They lived right here in San Antonio for years and years. My grandfather, my dad drove trucks for my grandfather. My grandfather drove trucks for my great-grandfather. So the Esparzas have been in trucking since the late 1920s, early 1930s. Lived out in West Texas through the 50s, where my dad grew up, because they were running around building roads out in West Texas during that time in the Eisenhower administration, and farm and market roads and the interstates that were growing out there. So they were aggregate haulers, and that's why my dad graduated from Imperial High School, Buena Vista High School out in Imperial, Texas. But he actually attended a number of schools as he was growing, because they went where the work was, and that was just It's like you think of migrant workers, we were migrant truckers back in those days. And so I have a great affinity for trucking, always had. And things changed when my father returned from the Vietnam War, and the GI Bill frankly allowed him to get out of trucking, and he chose that path. And he became the first in our family to get a college degree from Sul Ross University in Alpine, Texas. And then he began to get into teaching, and then later government work. And then my grandfather always teased me as I decided to go to college. He said, you know, if that doesn't work out, you can come work for me. So he'd always told me that. And I chose my path, went out in college, got a degree in public relations, you know, looked at various different things that I wanted to do, end up in politics. And when politics led me back to trucking, my grandfather, it was the first call I made, and he said, I told you you'd be back, and he was right. And you know, it was neat having them in my life. My grandmother just passed just recently. She was almost 103.
Whoa. My
grandfather passed away at 98, and they were married 79 years and 6 months, if I'm not mistaken. So they were a great example for all of us. And I always joked with my grandfather because he retired about 4 times. And every time he retired from trucking, the trailer just got a little shorter. And so ultimately, that's all he knew, you know, just worked his whole life, came back from World War II. When he passed, we had no idea he had 2 Bronze Stars. I mean, it wasn't that's just that generation. Now, my uncles didn't even know that, you know, it was just kind of one of those things, but he was just a proud truck driver. And if it says anything, my great-grandfather, I was able to interview him when I was 16 for a project, and I didn't understand this at the time that he told me, but I understood it later. I remember one of the questions that puzzled me, and you know, as a 16-year-old, what was your biggest failure in life, Grandpa? And his response, again, I didn't quite understand, but he said that I couldn't keep the gas station going, the old gas station, gas in grocery stores, basically what it was. And what I didn't understand at the time is that he felt that he wasn't astute enough at his trucking business to keep the little grocery store open. Well, this was the Depression. He had a community relying on that store and him for the credit that was occurring during that time. So in his mind, that was a failure. And of course I wouldn't understand it as a 16-year-old, but when I look back on that now, I think about that, and I was like, golly, that's an awful feeling to have. But you know, if he was here, I'd love to tell him. Wasn't you couldn't have imagined, you know, what history would have for us during that time. But that's the way he felt, and I think it just was an incredible sense of belonging to a community, and I think that's what we all aspire to do.
Well, and you, I mean, what's that pressure like then carried on to you to speak for maybe not the town and the general store as much, the gas station, but being the voice of Texas trucking and the representative of that it's more than just a voice. It really does carry a weight and responsibility. Does that
Well, it's a tremendous blessing. I'm blessed to have a really wonderful board, a great group of leaders within my executive committee. I think you get a chance to visit with a few of them this week as well. They've entrusted me in that, and for that reason, I think that just, you know, it takes any quit out of anybody. You know, you just want to do your best job. And I do think about the legacy of trucking, not just for the state, but in my own family. And so for me, it's even more important to find wins in this environment. You know, you said it from the onset of the interview here when you talked about why we write. You know, I think about the people in trucking, and I think about, you know, one of my favorite authors is a gentleman by the name of John Graves, who wrote a book called Hard Scrabble, and it really he writes about Texas. He wrote Goodbye to a River, you know, floating the Brazos River for the last time, and back then he thought in the 50s when they were going to dam up the river. But he talks about how hard scrabble, I think that it depicts our industry. The people that work in our industry they're a hard scrabble folks. They are the fabric of a community, and they're a very fabric of the industry are the people themselves. So when it comes to, you know, whatever communities we come from, our biggest community is the trucking industry. And I grew up in West Texas in the Permian Basin. And man, it's, things prick and bite and sting out there. And sometimes the people do too, but that's how you adapt to your environment. And I think for us in the trucking industry, you have to be tough and you have to fight. And that's what we're doing now when we are working to eliminate the bad actors in our industry.
Do you think that, everything's bigger in Texas, and I'll say we because I am from Texas, even though I live in Tennessee, but I'm going to claim it. When you say we, Texas is on a bullseye. They're in a spotlight, obviously. Outside of their size, what are some other things that you think the other state associations look to Texans for some guidance and
Well, I have to say when I think about the other state associations, I think about the leadership that's involved there. So I could never say, well, we're better than everybody in the state of Texas. While that's kind of a state mantra, there's some really sharp individuals that are running state associations that I learn from. So it's a special treat to have, Shannon from Arkansas here this week, Brenda from Iowa here this week, Eric from California here this week. Eric gets a hard time often because he is from California, but I keep reminding folks, man, he is one of us. He's has to work harder at his job in California, but he is definitely one of us. But that also speaks to that fabric. We often talk as states, hey, we will steal each other's ideas. What's working in your state? Let me give that a shot and see if we can make that work in our state. And I think that's why can be such a stronger unit for the policies that we're looking to implement, because we do work so well together. If I can find a great idea out in Indiana and bring it home to Texas, I will do that, and I will give Gary Langston full credit for it because he's a really great guy, a sharp guy, and very often there's just hundreds of years of association leadership just at my fingertips when it comes to my colleagues. So this is why we work so closely. We were just all together last week at our national convention for state execs, and we'll continue to do that. And that's why it's such a pleasure for me to bring them for the first time. I don't know why it took me 20 years to do that, but on a panel this week to talk about the trucking resurgence.
It's going to be exciting to listen to that. And I'm glad you brought up Lone Star leadership as the theme this week. When we say that word leadership, that really, to me, evokes the idea of not even so much fully what you're doing right now, but where you've come from. So a leader is, to me, everything that's who came before them, what inspired them, what influenced them, and where they are now. So for you as a leader here in Texas Trucking, as the leader in Texas Trucking, 20 years, by the way, congratulations.
Yeah, I can't believe that.
You look great.
So quickly.
Younger now than when I met you. What does that to you? What does leadership mean to you in your specific role?
It means to me to just, I've got 3 boys. I can't say they're young boys anymore. I guess they are. They're in their 20s. That's young. But to watch them grow up in this industry, the way I grew up around trucking, well, they grew up around it in a much different way. So to continue to be a great example, the best example that I can for those 3 boys, and see how they're, as my wife says, they're adulting well. And typically, I've got one here, and to me, that was that was just such a great day 3 years ago at this conference in San Antonio when I looked up, watched, what was one of my kids running around forever, actually a member of this association. So he's in commercial real estate working for one of the board members that owns a trucking company, but he's doing the real estate side and really enjoys it. And after I see him succeeding in that way, I said to myself, heck, I had this salesman right under my nose all these years, and I never really looked at it that way. So that's the neat part to me, is hopefully just being a good dad and being a good leader for my own family. And hopefully that spills out into the family that we're talking about here with trucking.
Well, I'd say it has to see your child follow in your footsteps, even in the vicinity, and still want to be
yeah.
around you is a win.
He's got his own footsteps, but to be around him in the way that we can, that just means the world to me, and it's certainly the same for my wife.
And still to be, proud and prideful of your state. We had it's funny, Larry Gatlin was on the show recently.
Larry Gatlin, yeah.
I know these Texans around here are a big
Yeah.
fan of his, and he was so funny. He said, he's like, listen, everybody wants to be from Texas. Nobody's like, hey, I'm from Rhode Island. And as minute as he said that, I'm like, you're going to get some Rhode Island hate. But, then he broke it down. He's like, in all seriousness, there's such a pride in loving where you come from and wanting to carry that out and speak about it. So here with the last few minutes left, I want to talk about moving forward and Lone Star leadership. What is it that you, maybe you're 20 more years here as president? Hopefully not. We'll let you retire sooner.
I'll
than
be
that.
around for 20 years.
Well, your grandmother lived 103.
My wife reminds me of that. She goes, I hope those genes carry, but we all have to take care of ourselves.
We
certainly,
do. But if you don't use it, you lose it, I guess. So for as long as you choose to continue working in this industry, what is it that you'd like to carry forward and be remembered in this next coming year for?
Yeah, well, I'll always choose this industry. There's no question about that, and I'm at the behest of our board as continue to operate in the way that I'm doing it. But hopefully we can continue to put wins on the board, continue to make good things happen for our industry. It's the hardest thing to do, to get folks involved and they want to make change. And when you talk about government, change is so slow. It takes a long time, often too long, and sometimes that is the frustration. So trying to keep their membership engaged, trying to keep the industry youthful. We've got to attract a new set of young leaders throughout this industry and throughout our association. And I feel like we're doing our part through the ELC, our Emerging Leaders Council that we have developed here. It's doing really well. It's in its 11th year now. Our first class was 2015. Now that I think about it, so we've got a brand new class with one little hiccup year with COVID, I think like everybody else had, that threw our numbers off. But here we are graduating one class, of which my son is graduating from, and then inviting a new group. And I had the chance to sit down with them yesterday, and I just sat down, and after they introduced themselves, I went, what an incredibly diverse group of individuals. And I cannot tell them enough, and I tried in the room saying, you will be surprised how the relationships that you strike in this room will carry with you for the next decades that you're in this business. You will find good friends here. You will find good colleagues and contacts that will help you, and y'all will support each other as you all have that common thread of trucking that runs through you.
It's a great message to put forward, and that is exactly why we should write, why we should share our stories, because we want to leave it as good as we found it, or even better. And I do like that it sounds to me, everyone pretends they want to play in the sandbox together, but if really what we want is to better our community, our country, our industries, then we really do have to play in the sandbox together.
Well, it's true. I worked for, you mentioned Perry was one of my mentors. Governor Perry became the Energy Secretary years later. I still stay in touch with him and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. But when I was working for him, I served as a senior advisor, and there was a point in a legislative session where he asked me to gather these industry leaders together in the same business, in the same line of work, but we pulled them into the governor's office, the little reception room actually outside his office, and he said, let's get a conclusion. They're all in the same boat. I need them to give me direction effectively. And they couldn't make up their mind. We spent all day in that room. And ultimately he said, look, if they don't give me an answer, then I'll just go out and make the best decision I can for the people of the state of Texas, and hopefully that's good enough for them. And he did that. And I remember thinking, it should be the easiest thing to do if we all are in the same line of work to say, hey, let's get 1, 2, 3 things done. This is what we ought to be focused on. But everybody had their priorities, and all it did was just kind of blow everything up. And I'll never forget that, because I thought it is a lot harder to do, but it's so important to build consensus. It may not be, we would both have to give up something if we decided that we're going to make a consensus to come and get this. Well, I really wanted this, but we both agree that this is going to be good for us and move the industry, the tide that lifts all boats there. But it didn't happen that day, and he had to make that decision, and he did, and it was still a good one. But it never left me that it's difficult to bring people together often, and it takes a certain skill set, and even within, it doesn't always work out.
It's what leadership is about, trusting your gut and believing you're in that position for the right reason. We've been speaking with John Esparza, President and CEO of the Texas Trucking Association, live from your annual conference, We Should Write, Texas Trucking Edition. Thanks for making time. I know you're off to ELC now. Go coach the next generation, friend.
We'll do our best.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
making time.